I need to start by telling you something that most people in my life did not know until recently, and that I spent years learning how to say without my voice going strange in my throat. I grew up in a house with a basement bedroom. Not a finished basement with carpet and recessed lighting, an unfinished concrete basement with a small bathroom that had a sink but no shower, and a padlock on the door that my father controlled from the outside. My twin sister Renata had a bedroom upstairs. Mine was downstairs, and for stretches of time that I will not describe in full detail here, the padlock was used. My parents had been told throughout the pregnancy that they were having a boy. When I arrived as a girl, something in them shifted in a direction that never shifted back. Renata, born minutes after me, was the child they reorganized themselves around. I was the child they reorganized the house around, downstairs, out of sight, managed rather than loved. I am telling you this not to perform my own suffering, but because everything that happened recently is unintelligible without it. The roots of a story matter, and these roots go very deep. I left at 18, packed what I could carry, had my identification documents in my hands by the end of the first conversation because I had prepared for every possible response, and walked out with the help of my Aunt Vera, the one person in my biological family who had always known what the house actually was and never pretended otherwise. My parents sent a cease and desist letter after me, which I framed, because there is something almost clarifying about a family that responds to their child leaving home by reaching for legal paperwork. At 21 I changed my name. My parents had given me a unisex name, deliberately, I think, as one final gesture toward the boy they had wanted, and I replaced it entirely. Clara is who I am. The name I left behind belongs to someone who no longer exists. I went to school. I became a midwife. I met Finn at a mutual friend's dinner party and understood within 45 minutes that he was someone I could build a life with, not because he was uncomplicated, but because he was honest, and honesty had been so scarce in my early life that I recognized it immediately and did not let it go. We married. We built something quiet and real. My estranged family existed in the past tense, and I kept them there. Then my sister Renata found my work email. If you have ever been the person in your family who was treated as the problem while someone else was treated as the prize, hit that like button right now. Because what I'm about to describe is going to reach something in you. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My work email is attached to my legal name, my chosen name, Clara, and I have never given it to anyone from my biological family. How Renata found it, I still don't fully know. What arrived in my inbox on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning was a long, winding email that I can only describe as a sad vent wrapped around a set of demands. She wrote about how she wished I was around, about how twins are supposed to be close, how everyone always said we should be inseparable, how she had imagined a different version of our relationship her entire life. There was grief in it, real grief, and I read that part carefully because I am not someone who dismisses grief easily, not even grief from people who once held the door to my basement bedroom while our father put the padlock on. But beneath the grief were the demands. Passive-aggressive, paper-thin attempts to imply that my wedding, which was upcoming, should include my estranged biological family as guests. No direct request. Just the unmistakable architecture of expectation, the particular pressure a person applies when they have been taught their whole life that their feelings constitute a claim on other people's choices. I did not respond. I filed the email with the others I keep in a folder labeled documentation, and I moved on. The emails became phone calls. The phone calls became screaming. The screaming became threats. I consulted an attorney and began the process of obtaining a formal cease and desist letter for Renata specifically, separate from the one my parents had sent me all those years ago, though this one ran in the opposite direction. 3 weeks went by. The calls stopped. I thought, with the specific and fragile relief of someone who has spent a lifetime hoping for quiet, maybe this is over. I was very wrong about that. Finn's family is everything mine was not. His parents, Ingrid and Henrik, are warm and direct and occasionally loud in the generous Swedish tradition, the kind of people who argue about small things and agree about large ones and always know where everyone stands. His sister Jade had been part of my life since Finn and I started dating. I had watched her grow from a young woman of 19 into someone I considered a genuine part of my world. She knew my history, all of it, down to the smallest details I rarely share with anyone. Finn had told her everything, with my knowledge and my blessing. Which is why what she did at the family dinner was not a mistake I could attribute to ignorance. We were at Ingrid and Henrik's home, a dinner that happened every few weeks, comfortable and familiar. Midway through the meal, Jade stood up with the particular expression of someone who has been holding a secret and can no longer contain it. She said she had a surprise for me. Her voice had that performing generosity quality, the tone of someone who has decided they are about to do something wonderful. She had driven Renata to our city, a 26-hour drive. My estranged twin, the woman I had a cease and desist letter pending against, was sitting in Jade's car in the driveway. Jade had arranged this so we could reconnect and be a family again. Ingrid's face went white. Henrik pushed back from the table. Finn was already on his phone, already standing, his voice shifting into a register I had heard exactly once before, calm in the specific way that very controlled people get calm when they are genuinely furious. He was calling the police and talking to his sister simultaneously, and what he said to Jade in that kitchen I will not repeat here because it is between them, but I know that every word of it was deserved. Ingrid and Henrik took me to the back room. Ingrid held both my hands and looked at me and said, "You are safe, you are not going anywhere, this will be handled." Henrik stood in the doorway between me and the rest of the house like a man who had decided his position and did not intend to move from it. The police arrived. Renata was in Jade's car in the driveway and had already begun crying before any officer reached the window, the practiced, strategic tears of someone who has spent a lifetime understanding how to deploy emotion as a tool. Jade tried to explain the situation to the officers in terms that minimized what she'd done. Ingrid stepped in and mentioned the cease and desist letter. The officers drove Renata to the airport. She was given a formal warning. No arrest, our jurisdiction doesn't arrest on first warnings when there's no physical contact. She was put on a flight home at Jade's expense. When I came back into the kitchen, Finn was standing at the counter looking at his own hands. He apologized. He said it again. He apologized every hour for the rest of that evening, for the family he had brought into my life, for not having somehow predicted that his sister would do this. I told him each time that it was not his fault, and I meant it each time, and I also knew it would take a while before he fully believed me. What followed was several weeks of chaos arriving in waves, and I want to walk you through it because each wave mattered. Jade was immediately and completely ostracized within her own family. Ingrid stopped speaking to her. Henrik made his feelings known in the direct way of a man who does not leave room for ambiguity. Finn's oldest brother, who had been at the dinner and witnessed everything, wanted nothing to do with her. The one family member who rallied around Jade was their cousin Owen, who apparently believed that what she had done was a simple mistake and that everyone was overreacting. I received a text from Owen that I read without expecting much and found surpassing all my worst expectations. He wrote that he failed to see why I was banning Jade from the holidays for a simple mistake, that it seemed excessive and inconvenient, that Jade was young and allowed to make mistakes, and that I should grow up. He concluded by wondering what exactly I planned to do, force her to stay at someone else's house while the whole family celebrated together. I handed the phone to Finn and told him to handle it however he thought best, because it was not my circus and not my problem, but I did not want it handled from my phone. Finn sent a message to the entire family group chat. He wrote that it had come to his attention that some family members disagreed with our decision to exclude Jade from our home during the upcoming holidays. He had thought about it and decided he didn't feel comfortable hosting this year at all. He'd like to take a step back until everyone understood the full story. He suggested everyone stay home and let another family host if they felt strongly about gathering. He showed it to me before sending. I told him it was perfect. He sent it. We turned off our phones and went to bed. I should mention, for context, that I am a midwife. I work primarily in maternal health, and at the time all of this was happening, I was self-isolating because I had a patient approaching viability who I needed to be clean for. My clinic was locked. We were not taking drop-in appointments. Finn's grandparents, Gran and Grandpa Ray, are people who have always adored Jade in the particular, uncritical way of grandparents who have decided one grandchild can do no wrong. When they heard what had happened, they drove to my clinic. With Jade. To demand that I speak to her so things could go back to normal. My clinic's registered nurse came out of her office to find 3 people banging on a locked clinic door. She had her phone open because we have audio and video recording throughout the building, posted signs, completely legal. She told them she wasn't letting anyone in, that she didn't know who they were, and that if it was a medical emergency they should go to the hospital. She called the non-emergency line and reported them for attempting to enter a locked medical facility. Then she went back to her office and sat down. An officer happened to be nearby. He talked to Gran and Grandpa Ray outside, then called me because I had them blocked. I answered and heard the situation explained in the flat professional voice of someone who has encountered a great many people convinced their personal emergency constitutes a public right of access. They had brought Jade to my workplace, a clinic serving pregnant women and newborns. During a pandemic. To stage an ambush apology, I called my supervisor. We called the officer back and had them written a formal trespassing warning. Finn called Gran and Grandpa Ray when I handed him the phone, and from the other room I could hear his voice go up in a way it almost never does. Their explanation was that Jade needed to give me an apology so we could all go back to being a family. Finn told them they had lost their say in that timeline. Ingrid, when we called her, was furious in a way that Finn said he had not seen since he was a child. He told me the last time she was that angry, things had not gone well for the other person. She was speaking very fast Swedish and then switching to English when she remembered I was there, which meant the English was whatever she could manage in the state she was in, and what she managed was entirely accurate. We blocked everyone and agreed to spend the next period focused entirely on ourselves. On the other side of the country, my biological family had been receiving their legal paperwork. The restraining orders for my parents and for Renata were delivered and signed for. My mother, I have taken to calling her the egg donor in my own mind, because it is the most accurate description of our relationship, had always been the more volatile of the two. I had expected an explosion. What I got instead was silence, which was somehow more unnerving. Then I woke up to police at my front door. Grandpa Ray, the JN grandfather on Finn's side, the one who spoils Jade and had shown up at my clinic, had called in a welfare check. The story he told the police, apparently sourced entirely from Renata, was that Finn beat me daily, held me hostage at home, refused to let me leave, and regularly degraded me in front of others. The officers told us, with the exhausted directness of people who have encountered a great many improbable stories, that they had not believed a word of it because the only evidence provided came from someone under a restraining order. They asked to come inside. We let them in and showed them our home, our dogs, and the ducklings we had been raising, who were living in a heated pen in the utility room and were very pleased to have visitors. The officers filed a counter-report and told us any future welfare checks on this address would be flagged as potential harassment. Our attorney sent Grandpa Ray a cease and desist letter. Finn's name was deliberately left off it. We had agreed that if Finn's name was attached to legal correspondence to that side of the family, it would feed the narrative that he was the controlling party. Only my name. Only my decision. 2 days later, Aunt Vera, the woman who had helped me leave at 18, the one truly good person in my biological family, forwarded me a text she had received from Renata. I am going to describe it rather than reproduce it because the language does not need to live in this story. The short version is that Renata had decided my husband was a sociopath who had isolated me from my family, that I had looked terrible and thin the last time she'd seen me, which was years ago, that she'd noticed a black eye and bandaging, and that someone needed to check on me because she was certain I was in danger. My eye had been black because I walked into a cabinet door in our kitchen. The bandaging was from a cooking burn on my hand. My clothes had been workout clothes because Renata had encountered me during a morning walk I had not expected to be observed during. In her version of events, the only possible explanation for my estrangement was a controlling husband. The alternative, that I had made a free and considered choice based on 21 years of documented abuse, was not available to her narrative. I cannot fully explain the specific quality of exhaustion that comes from being the subject of someone else's story when you know exactly what the true story is. We forwarded everything to our attorney and let him build the paper trail. I need to tell you about Jade's ending because it was not what any of us expected. Owen had been keeping in touch with Jade after she was effectively cut off from the family. He had her staying at his apartment while she supposedly sorted herself out. His girlfriend began noticing things that concerned her. Erratic behavior, blackouts, lapses she couldn't explain. It turned out to be drugs. Owen had known for some time that Jade was using and had decided to handle it privately, apparently believing he could get her to a treatment program without involving anyone else. His girlfriend did not agree with this approach. She turned Jade in, moved out the same day, and submitted to investigators the messages she had found between Owen and Grandpa Ray, messages that clarified several things about who had been coordinating pressure on us from that side of the family. Finn was devastated. He kept saying that if he had known, he would have gotten her help before any of this happened. I told him the same thing I believe about everyone who causes serious harm while struggling with serious problems. The disease explains the behavior, and it doesn't excuse it. Both things are true. He knows that. It still hurt him in the way that loving someone always hurts when they turn out to be someone you didn't fully know. Jade went into custody. Ingrid and Henrik cut off all support except what they were legally obligated to provide. At the same time, and I want to be clear that I include this not for drama but because it is part of what eventually freed me, my biological parents were having a reckoning of their own. The grandfather in their family, a man I had never fully trusted but who had at least been consistent in his affection for Renata, began to see things more clearly as the various legal proceedings created paper trails that were difficult to rationalize. He also began to understand what had been happening to Renata herself. My parents, faced with Renata's deteriorating mental state and the legal pressure from my restraining orders, made a choice that clarified everything I had ever needed to know about them. They told her that everything, her breakdown, her behavior, her situation, was her own fault. They spent 3 days screaming at her, withholding basic care, refusing to let her leave. She ended up at urgent care for injuries sustained during those 3 days, and had a breakdown while being seen that required hospitalization. Her doctor and mental health team reported it. My parents faced charges. My parents then tried, through their attorney, to reach me with a new narrative, that Renata had been the abuser all along, that they had done nothing wrong, that they were victims of the child they had raised. They were hoping I would believe a version of events that erased 34 years of documented history and replaced it with a story in which they were innocent bystanders to their own household. I did not respond. I did not take the bait. I had spent too long learning to recognize that particular move to fall for it now. Meanwhile, Finn and I had been quietly preparing to leave the country. We told no one the date. We told no one the destination. We packed over several weeks, shipped what mattered, handled the logistics in complete privacy. The morning we left, our apartment was empty and our animals were in their carriers, and we drove to the airport without calling anyone to say goodbye. We landed several days later at a friend's house where we were quarantining before moving into temporary accommodation. Finn called his family that evening to tell them we were gone. Gran cried. Grandpa Ray was furious and demanded to know why we had left stable jobs and a stable home to move to another country. Finn, who had been reading about a particular concept that several kind people had suggested to him during all of this, explained it to them with the patience of a man who has finally decided that his patience has limits and this is where they are. He told them he would still be financially reliable if they had a genuine emergency. He told them we were not coming back. He told them that anyone who wanted to blame his wife for this was welcome to examine who had actually driven events to this point. Ingrid called separately and said goodbye properly. She cried, the real kind, and told me I was family. I believed her. We signed papers on a house with 3 bedrooms and an in-home office and a kitchen large enough to actually cook in. We had already had virtual interviews with a fertility clinic before we left. My new doctor reviewed my file. I had a medical history that made natural conception unlikely, a result of emergency surgery years ago that I had known about for a long time but had only recently received confirmation could be worked around through IVF. He approved us for treatment, pending some upcoming tests. Finn told Ingrid only that I was a bit unwell. I had stopped my migraine medication as part of the preparation process, as it needed to leave my system before we could begin, and the transition was rough. Gran, in the background of the call, said something about people who run away to have babies away from their families and how it wasn't right. Finn, who had been without coffee for a week on doctor's guidance and was running on the very last reserves of his patience, told her to shove her fake tears and informed her that if anyone was to blame for where we had ended up, she could start with herself, her husband, and her granddaughter. He retracted our offer to provide financial support. Ingrid said goodbye and hung up. We went to bed in a country that was ours now. The animals slept at the foot of the bed. Finn was asleep in minutes, the specific deep sleep of someone who has been carrying an enormous amount of weight and has finally been allowed to put it down. The last pieces fell into place over the following weeks. My egg donor attempted to open a credit account in my name. It failed. I had frozen my credit at 18, required an IRS PIN for my taxes, and had my social security number locked, all of which I had arranged years ago when I left, because my parents had threatened as much when I walked out and I had believed them. The application was denied. She was asked verification questions she could not answer correctly. The whole attempt collapsed before it got anywhere. Aunt Vera told me that my parents had been staying with the grandfather in my biological family, the one who had slowly been reconsidering his view of events. When they tried to get him involved in their credit scheme and he understood what they had done, he threw them out. He had a personal history with identity theft. His own brother had ruined his credit decades ago, and he had zero tolerance for it. They ended up in their car. I filed for identity theft even though nothing had gone through. Attempted fraud is still fraud. The paper trail mattered. My father, apparently, eventually decided he had had enough of my mother. He got his old job back, moved into a friend's place, and announced that everything wrong with their marriage and their lives was her fault. She apparently tried to physically attack him. He called the police. She attacked an officer in the process of being removed from the premises and is currently awaiting psychiatric evaluation. My father, to be clear, is not someone I have any interest in rehabilitating or forgiving. He chose not to protect me for 18 years. His decision to finally hold someone accountable when that someone inconvenienced a man he wanted money from does not reflect any improvement in his character. But I note it because it is the shape of how their story ended, and shapes matter. My twin Renata is in long-term inpatient psychiatric care, funded by the grandfather who eventually came to understand what our household had produced. He sent me a 9-page handwritten letter acknowledging, carefully and specifically, every harm he had turned a blind eye to. He wrote about a piece of Halloween candy he had taken from me when I was very small, which struck me as the most honest thing anyone from that family had ever put in writing, not because it was the worst thing on the list, but because he had held onto it long enough to still feel it. He is moving to where Aunt Vera lives. He rewrote his will and left everything to her. He told me I owed him nothing and he expected nothing, and I believe him, and I am choosing to let that letter exist in a folder rather than in the active part of my mind. Jade is serving 8 years in federal prison. I did not set out to destroy anyone's life. I set out to survive my own. Those two things got tangled together in ways I did not control and could not have predicted, and I have made my peace with that. Our IVF treatment begins in January. I am not going to describe how that feels because I don't have words that are equal to it, and I have learned over the years that some things are diminished by trying to make them fit into language. Finn cried when we found out we had been approved. He does not cry easily. I held his hand and looked at the wall for a while and felt something that I have decided to call, simply, relief. We have a house with 3 bedrooms. One is an office. The math of that is obvious, and I am choosing to let it be obvious without making it into a speech. What I want to say instead is something smaller and more specific. There is a version of this story where I stayed, where I absorbed each wave of contact as it came, responded, explained, managed, and tried to thread the needle between protecting myself and keeping some version of the family relationships I had been told I was supposed to want. I know that version of this story because I lived adjacent to it for years, making every choice except the one that actually mattered, which was to stop treating my own survival as a problem I could be reasonable about. Leaving is not a single event, it is a practice. You leave at 18 with a bag. You leave again at 21 with a new name. You leave again when you stop returning calls. You leave again when you sign the restraining order. You leave again when you get on the plane. Each leaving is real, and each one costs something, and each one is also correct. I am thousands of miles from the house with the padlock. I have a husband who answered the door at dinner the night everything fell apart and started calling the police before I had even processed what was happening. I have a mother-in-law who held my hands in a back room and said the word safe out loud to me until I believed it. I have a country that is mine now and a house with 3 bedrooms and animals who sleep at the foot of the bed and a January appointment on the calendar that I look at every single morning. My name is Clara. I chose it at 21 and I have never had a single day of doubt about it since. That is the whole story. That is where I am. If any part of this found something in you, if you have ever had to leave something that was supposed to love you, or if you are still trying to figure out if leaving is something you are allowed to do, leave that in the comments.